Extreme environments and isolated locations have always attracted people who wanted to get away from ordinary social settings. And Preservation Inlet has certainly attracted its share of colourful and odd personalities, what we might charitably call characters. Today we're going to consider the stories of two from the 19th century. They were both men, as indeed were most of the early Pākehā who spent any amount of time in this remote region. But the first one, Jack Price, did at least have a customary wife in the highborn Kāti Māmoe Kaitahu woman Hine Awhitia, who survived him and later married to become a highly regarded member of the Furthest Strait community as Mrs. John Williams of Rakiura, Stewart Island.
John, or Jack Price, was born in New South Wales around 1790 and was thus one of the very first generation of white Australians, also known as currency lads. He came to New Zealand as an experienced sealer and was one of the first Pākehā men to settle permanently on the southern coast and become part of Maori society through his relationship with Hine Awhitia from 1824. Hine Awhitia was the eldest daughter of Pahi, a leading rakatira in Murihiku, with his large kaik at Pāhia between Te Waiwai and Colac Bays.
His wife's high status seems to have saved Jack Price from many a scrape in the 1820s. Indeed, he seems to have been a somewhat rambunctious character, perhaps reflecting his origins growing up in a penal colony, surrounded by convicts and ex-convicts, and also the stressful and somewhat tenuous existence of living as a Pākehā Māori.
But it was their joint efforts that helped Jack and Hine Awhitia survive a shared ordeal when Price's theft of some sealskins saw them marooned together on Solander Island, a volcanic rock sticking out of the sea some 40 kilometres south of the mainland in the raging waters of the Southern Ocean.
Sheltering in a cave, the couple managed to survive long enough to make themselves a little boat out of sealskins and plaited vines, essentially a coracle. They then braved the surging waters of Furthest Strait and paddled it all the way back to the mainland. It's rumoured that they subsequently took refuge in Preservation Inlet, living in a cave at nearby Gulch's Head until Jack Price's death in 1829. He was buried here on Price's Beach, and 40 years later, the surveyor Adam Johnston reported coming across his grave marker, a toterist slab with his name and date of death still perfectly preserved. Alas, there's no sign of it now, but at least the name endures to remember this pioneer of cross-cultural relationships here in the Deep South. Fortunately, there's a more substantial memorial for our next character, the hermit, explorer and indefatigable prospector, William Docherty.
From Glasgow in Scotland, Docherty was working on a sheep run in North Otago when gold was first discovered in the Lindis Pass in early 1861. He was one of the first diggers to join in this first mini gold rush in Otago, and the prospecting bug seems to have really gotten into his system.
He would spend the rest of his life roaming the most remote regions of Otago in the search for gold, silver, copper or any other mineral that might make him rich.
Docherty made his first exploratory trip to the west coast in 1866. He began prospecting in Dusky Sound in 1877 and spent most of the next 20 years living there. Occasionally his name would appear in news reports with another of his many schemes to make Otago's southwestern coast a viable place for mining and settlement. Whether it was the copper lode he discovered there, asbestos, another of his dusky discoveries, the sheep run he leased, or his track making efforts to develop a link through to central Otago, Docherty became a well-known figure.
He was respected for the hardships he endured, for his wide-ranging explorations and for the expertise that he developed, and moreover, he was always willing to share his knowledge with visitors.
For many years, he was the only human being living at Dusky, and when Richard Henry came to live there as a wildlife ranger in 1894, Docherty became a regular visitor to his station and, to be honest, a bit of a nuisance, borrowing his tools and bludgeoning supplies.
But then in 1895, news of gold discoveries further south drew the old prospector down here to Preservation Inlet, and he relocated to Coal Island. Typically, he made the dangerous sea voyage in a small open dinghy held together by wire and string. Docherty's arrival caused a bit of a stir, lending credence to Coal Island's reputation as a new goldfield. Surely, if Docherty thought there was gold here, there must be something in it. But sadly, the long years of living rough were beginning to catch up with the legendary prospector. One afternoon in March 1896, he was across the sound here, visiting the hotel that stood here in Cromarty, when he suddenly felt like he needed to take a nap. He sat down on a chair and promptly slumped to the ground, dead. He was just 65 and worn out before his time. News of Docherty's death quickly spread, and miners gathered from all around the inlet to pay their respects. Next day, a moving funeral service was held, and then a flotilla of boats carried the old man's remains across the water to Cemetery Island, where he was laid to rest here. A few months later, a newspaper report appeared detailing the value of Docherty's estate. And after all those years searching relentlessly for the big strike that would make his fortune, it was worth a mere £3.